Hi, this is Dave. Here's a question. Is it enough to be active in church and honest in business? Is that sufficient? Let me repeat it. Is it enough to be active in church and honest in business? So, I was recently interviewing a mature Christian business person for one of my spots in my peer groups. I have two peer groups. I call them Christian Business Impact Groups. Anyway, tell me about your spiritual journey, I asked, and he launched into a description of his local church and the various roles he played in that institution. He wasn't usher, he was on this board or that board, and he served in some capacity and was a part of these programs. Pretty impressive, except that he nowhere mentioned Jesus Christ. His view of his spirituality was defined by the roles he played in his local congregation. Now, I can understand that. Not so many years ago, I would have answered in exactly the same way. I suspect that most of the listeners to this podcast would answer in a very similar fashion as well. And that, unfortunately, is one of the saddest statements of our times. The challenge of being a Christian business person in our times is characterized by conflict. You know, the challenge of being a Christian business person in our times is characterized by conflict. All kinds of conflict. Here's one. On one hand, we understand the need to make money, to be profitable and be accountable for our actions and our results to our bosses, our shareholders, and our families. And on the other hand, we understand the command to obey and allow the Lord to determine the results. That's a conflict. Here's another one. On one hand, we understand the wisdom in investing time and money into our businesses and careers. And on the other hand, we're mindful of the command to give. So do we invest in our businesses or do we give? That's a conflict. And so on it goes. And, you know, we feel like we're in the middle, being pulled by two powerful forces in opposite directions. On one hand, we have the world's prescriptions for business success, and on the other, the call for a Christian life. I recall the thought that I had after the interview for what was then to become my first professional sales position years ago. As a recent convert, I was sensitive to the calls of Christ on my life, but as a young father, I needed to make a living. So, this is going to be tricky, I thought, contemplating how I might navigate the turbulent waters between what I saw as these two opposing forces in my life. Because it's tricky, a common strategy is to compartmentalize. Christianity, under this strategy, Christianity becomes what we do in church. And the degree to which we are active in the programs and the activities and the events of the church determine to what degree we are, quote, good Christians, end quote. Business, again, in this strategy, business and our careers lie outside of that realm. Or so we tell ourselves. So we understand that some Christian commands carry over. We try to be honest, for example, and we try generally to be fair with people, but we understand our program is to be active in church and honest in business, and that's it. So our strategy is to compartmentalize. Again, active in church and honest in business. But, from time to time, we can't help but wonder if that is enough. Is that really what God wants from us? Is church activity really the definition of our Christianity? Is it possible that our careers and our businesses could become the primary expression of our Christianity? Could we really be Christ's disciples in the business world? Could our careers and our businesses become our ministry? Well, okay, certainly the Bible is filled with stories of business people leading great movements of God throughout history. The list is too great to mention all of them here, but it begins with Abraham, the wealthy rancher and sheep herder who birthed the Israelite nation. He was one of the wealthiest people in the Bible and clearly connected to God in a special way. Then there's Moses, who spent most of his life in the sheep raising business and again had a special role to play in God's plan. In the New Testament, Lydia was a business person who converted to Christianity and brought her whole household, that's all the family, all the servants, all the slaves, all the employees, brought them all with her. And now there's Jesus, of course, who spent most of his life as a carpenter, maybe even had a small business. We would think of him, I suppose, as a small business person, or in today's vernacular, as a solopreneur. And of course, there's Paul, the tent-making sole proprietor, who was so active in nurturing the New Testament church. The role of business in the Bible is much larger and more robust than you could have thought possible. Read the Good Book on Business. The Good Book on Business, by the way, I'll put a link in the show notes to get a clear perspective. So there is reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, your career and your business could be something larger, more spiritual, and more significant than you have ever thought possible. Okay, so if that were so, what exactly would that look like, and how would you go about moving in that direction? So in the direction of business is ministry. Here's a couple of suggestions. Expose yourself to the body of content revolving around Christianity in the marketplace. There are literally dozens of websites, hundreds of articles and podcasts dealing with it. There's a whole body of biblical truth that you are not going to get in church. You'll find a whole new world of spiritual life opening up to you. I'll put a link in the show notes again to a resource. We have a resource page where we have a lot of things listed. You can start there. So that's number one, expose yourself to content. Number two, find a group of Christian business people who meet together regularly. And, there are these groups all over the country. And, of course, I run 2 Zoom groups myself. They typically meet regularly and encourage and support one another. From my experience, almost every city has at least one group like this. It's sort of a natural manifestation of your newfound understanding. So ask people you know and see if you can uncover a group. And if you want to consider my CBIG groups, just email me and we'll see about having a conversation. So 2 steps to take to begin the process of being bigger in the kingdom than just active in church. Get involved in content and make connections. Content and connections. Now, if you can take these 2 steps, you'll be well on your way to beginning to experience your spiritual power in the marketplace. Okay? By the way, if you want some sort of an easy first step, I'm going to recommend my XI community. It stands for Excellence and Influence. And we have a Christian business persons group where we provide content and connections. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay, that's it. We're done. Bye-bye. But it goes way beyond that. The Bible clearly teaches that God wants to work with us. He wants to be in league with us in our work, in our businesses, from the very moment of creation when he created Adam and gave him the job of naming the animals and then said, I'll bring them to you and you name them. That was teamwork. He set the precedent, and the precedent is God gives you tasks to do and works with you to complete them. And one task, of course, that you have to do is your job or your business. God wants to work with you and have a relationship with you in your job and in your business. Truly, truly, business is ministry. It's where we connect to God. It's where we get closer to him. It's where we express our spirituality.